Hello and welcome to the show. My name's Relvin. This is Do All the Things, and today 5 op amps compared in my DIY DOD 250 clone. Now, when we last left off, I made a few corrections to my DIY clone box here to, update it to modern spec. I was able to determine that one of the biggest tone differences between the vintage pedals and the modern pedals is this one capacitor right here. The modern pedal, my DOD Malmsteen pedal, the 308, would have an 001, and the vintage one had an 01. And the 01 made it sound more smashy and crank ampy and that stuff. I prefer the 001, but I have a jumper to try both. I also have a jumper to disable the diode clipping. One other change that I made to this pedal is this 047 right here has been changed to an 056, just to warm it up a little bit. Now, off camera, I added the 100 ohm resistor onto there, and that pretty much did nothing. But then I did a slight rewiring to the power situation, and that got rid of the oscillation, if you recall, I was having problems with. But, that's just to catch you up on what's going on. At the end of the day, I have this awesome sauce clone pedal that I made, and one of the special features about it is I made an easily accessible socketable op amp so that I can change the op amp to change the tone, because I've found that changing your op amp changes the tone, just like changing the tubes in your tube amp. Since then, I've started ordering op amps online on eBay, and yeah, a bunch of them came in today, and here they are. So what do we have here? Well, one of the most important pieces of resistances that I'm going to start with is an actual vintage 741. And if I'm interpreting the date code correctly, it's possibly from 1974. It is a can, it is a 741, and it is made by AMD. It's an AMD op amp. If you've been following the comedy, you know I'm into the computers too, and I'm an AMD fanboy. So to have an AMD processor in my effects pedal also, in my Overdrive, well, that's actually quite tempting to me. Now, the can had to kind of be adapted, and honestly, I'm gonna have to do better than this to actually be able to use it. But right now, I just kind of jammed it into a socket there, and that socket will socket into the socket so that I can socket my socket while I socket my socket, and we'll be able to hear what it sounds like. Also on the list are these guys. Came in a pack of 2, made by RCA. These are CA3140Es. And according to the online datasheet, it directly replaces industry type 741 in most applications. Will this be the application? I don't know, we're gonna find out. Look at the specifications. It has an open loop gain of 100 and a slew rate of 9. And those are 2 interesting specifications in which to keep in mind while doing these tests. Because to the best of my knowledge, the open loop gain is how many dBs of boost you're gonna get, assuming you don't use the feedback loop, open loop. This feedback loop suppresses, in a method that I've explained in the previous video, it suppresses the gain and that's what turns it down. You disconnect that feedback loop and boom, it just runs a full send. Slew rate also has to do with the voltage swing. Basically, you have your AC line, and it's basically how fast the AC signal can swing back and forth, right? So the slew rate is directly proportional to its frequency response, from what I can tell. The higher that number, the more frequency response, the more information can pass through. The 741 has a slew rate of 0.5. Whereas something like the TL081 has a slew rate of 13, and indeed, if you jam a 081 in there, you hear a lot more going on. There's more whoosh, 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 more saturation. It also probably has more gain. Now I'm gonna assume this 741 matches the 741. These 2 guys that are supposed to replace the 741 have a slew rate of 9 and a gain of 100. I couldn't find a straight answer to the gain of a 741. So without further ado, I got the old Marshall 800 set up. I got my good cab with reasonable miking on it. Let's hear what these sound like. Now I'm starting with the UA741. It's a 60-cent special that I picked up from DigiKey, and I find it sounds a little bit better than the Buck30 LM741CN. The C1N seems to be the bog standard one, and well, the UA sounds better. Oddly enough, they're now both made by Texas Instruments. So let's hear what that UA sounds like. by the way, if I didn't warn you, I play metal. That's one reason why I feel this is a good test of what these guys do, because we're pushing these puppers hard. All right, so I pulled that out. What are we gonna do next? The AMD or the RCA? The AMD or the RCA? Oh, it's gotta be the AMD, so that we just go 1 to 1. That doesn't fit so nice. So, yeah. Hopefully it sits, okay, it's gonna sit up a little bit. A little noisier. But that's probably because it's not sitting nice. Maybe it'll sound better sitting nice too. I'm noticing a difference in the crunch. There's definitely a sound difference. And maybe I think it sounds better than the UA. Also has a warmer, darker tone. That's interesting. I guess I could see how the original pedals, the vintage ones, were regarded as sounding a bit warmer. Indeed, that op amp is sounding warmer. I'm gonna do another test here where I'm gonna pull the diode clipping to hear what the op amp sounds like alone. Because believe it or not, the op amps themselves distort. Even without diode clipping, it can sound pretty good. Real quick, I'm gonna plug into the low input. That's gonna tell us what the pedal sounds like raw. That's no diode clipping, so that's just op amp. And finally, I'm gonna put the diode clipping back into place, and I'm gonna switch over to vintage mode. See, I have a jumper so that I can activate the original capacitor value and make this guy sound like the old pedal. That was a NOS vintage AMD op amp, and I'm liking it so far. So, the CA3140E, it's supposed to be a drop-in equivalent to the 741. Well, let's drop it in and see if that's the case. Now, diode clipping on, I'm gonna put it in modern mode. First time with your new guitar, bud? I feel like it might have a touchless gain. Alright, let's pull Diode, hear what just the op amp sounds like. Whoa, this guy's way more harmonic without the diodes, which is usually the opposite of what happens. That's interesting. It has a very similar sound to the AMD 741, except even a slight darker, but the mids sound more aggressively crunchy, and it almost sounds more compressed. Like the 3D depth of the mid crunch is less dynamic, but the texture is very, very similar. That's interesting. That's interesting. The RCA. Let's just plug real quick into the low input and hear what the op amp alone sounds like. Let us move forward. Diode clipping back in place. Pull the RCA. I'm not gonna bother trying the second RCA. Maybe they sound similar, maybe they sound different. We're gonna move on to something a little bit different and something a little bit more interesting. Something that I was curious about and wanted to try out because it's kind of counterintuitive. We don't usually do this kind of thing. Probably not because it's probably not a good idea, but probably because of cost. These guys retail for a lot more than your average op amp. Not a lot more for an individual buying a one-off, but for a company buying thousands of them, oh, it makes a difference. When you can get a 741 or a modern guy for, 40 to 60 cents a piece, and then these guys, they cost $5 each. Well, these are Burr Brown op amps. Now, if you're in pro audio or worked in pro audio or a gearhead into recording, you've probably heard of Burr Brown. Maybe not the highest end on the market, but they're supposed to be way better than your typical basic biatch op amp. They're supposed to be pro audio op amps for, nice mic preamps and stuff like that. But we're gonna try these out because they're pin compatible. Let us try the OPA 227 first. Now the OPA 227 is rated for an open loop gain of 160, so it's gonna be the hottest op amp we're trying so far, and a slew rate of 2.3. So the slew rate is kind of, within the range of the kind of op amps that we use in these pedals. And that open loop gain, well, it's up there. It's up there. So let's hammer hawk it in there and see what it does. Burr Brown op amp in a Stomp box. What a novel idea. It works. Immediately you notice the more gain. It definitely has more gain, but I found it sounded smoother when I first popped it in there and then got like just a little bit crustier. I wonder if running this op amp like this is kind of screwing with it. We feel like maybe we need to turn down the gain. With the gain down, it has almost an even crispier crunch than the other op amps, but it doesn't sound as fizzy. Like it's I expected more but it doesn't. It's got grain. It's got grain. And like the funny thing is, it's not the op amp you would think to put into this pedal, but the sound I'm getting is every bit as relevant as what your stock 741 is gonna get. It's different, but it's usable. It's a sound that I could see someone pop it into their pedal being like, yeah, that's the one. That's what I want. You know what I mean? I think the 250, or any pedal in general, they're underutilized. Just like tube amps. Most people out there have no idea what their tube amp actually sounds like, because they just replace the tubes when they wear out and they get, oh, whatever's cheap, oh, whatever the manufacturer has labeled on them. They don't experiment. I have like a dozen set of power tubes that are fresh, and I swap them around, I experiment, I hear the different tones. And one job that I do on the side is I help consult people with their tone. They bring their amps to me, we sit down, we swap out the different tubes, hear the different sounds, help them figure out what they want. I'm feeling like we can do that to these pedals now. If we get out of our head that, oh, it's gotta be a 741, oh, it's gotta be an LM308, and just start freaking YOLO buying whatever we find on eBay, because these guys are not more than $5 a piece, we might be able to find some new tones. So babbling aside, I've pulled the diode clipping, so let's hear what just the op amp sounds like. By the way, that's my volume, that's my drive. A lot of high-end fizz now. It's like I just opened a fresh can of club soda. It's almost too dirty if you go fast. This might be good for black metal. I think it's even more too dirty and raw for black metal. And just for good measure, into the low input, what's this sound like on its own? That's actually interesting. The combination of gain and texture without diode clipping, it kind of reminds me of like a mellow amp cranked. We have a distortion pedal now. Just crank the drive and boom. That's interesting. It could be used as a distortion pedal in a pinch. All right, so what's next? The OPA 604. So what do we say about the OPA 604? FET input, low distortion operational amplifier. Key term, low distortion. And when they show the block diagram of the internal circuit, it literally has distortion, rejection, circuitry. That would be funny if it rejects the distortion and runs clean. Somehow, I believe that just can't be possible. Now this guy has an open loop gain of 100, so it's not going to be as hot as the 227, but it has a slew rate of 25. Will it sound fizzier? Let's find out. already it sounds less aggressive and cleaner than the 227. And yes, it does have more fizz and high frequency information there, and it almost feels more harmonic. Okay, let's pull the diodes. That's cool. We still get some good harmonics even with the drive turned down. So if you don't want it saturated to distortion, because that's the thing. Sometimes with the other op amps like the 741, we start to turn that drive down, we lose our harmonics. So if you want to clean up your tone but still get harmonics, this guy, okay, low input. What does this sound like? How good is that distortion rejection circuitry working? Not only is the distortion rejection circuitry not doing its job, but it sounds more like a distortion pedal than the last guy if we crank the drive in the clean input. So far, I feel like that OPA 604 has got something going for it in the harmonics. So that is our two Burr Browns, our two 741s. There's one more left, and I couldn't find appropriate information on this. I just kind of YOLO threw it into basket because like it was there from the same seller. We have a UA 709 TC. Never heard of it before. And even the data sheet is kind of vague, if you will. It's pin compatible. It looks old. This is a Fairchild semiconductor, by the way. Monolithic high gain operational amplifier using the planar expatrial process. Low offset, high impedance, blah, blah, blah. Low power consumption. Well, by the way, that is another thing to consider. Some of these guys are really low power consumption to the point where, you know, your battery might last forever if you don't have an LED. You might wonder why I didn't put an LED on here, because that LED, in such a basic circuit like this, that LED literally can consume more power, sometimes 4 times as much as the actual circuit itself. So it's just, you're just adding a battery drainer. Now, based on this, I can't get a straight answer on gain or slew rate. I know the information's there. The problem is it's in languages that I don't understand. Supply current, typical 2.1, 2.7. Yeah, you see that is like way less than an LED. An LED is gonna be like 5 milliamps. I don't even know if this will handle this kind of an audio signal. This could like not work at all. Either way, we're jamming it in there, buds. And we'll put the diode clipping back into place. All right, here we go. Let's see what this does. See what I mean? It doesn't like it. Pulled the diode. Well, that's the UA709TC. It does not like it, sir. It does not like it at all. In fact, it feels like it was struggling. It sounded very unhappy. So, oh well. Too bad. I guess it's not rated for that application. I guess it's gonna sit in my parts bin until I maybe need a very basic voltage comparator and it works for that. But either way, interesting. We started off with the UA741, which indeed sounds better than the 741 CM, but maybe that's because the CN is the new suck. If we get ourselves, bam, a vintage AMD can, that unlocked some sweetness. But then we could maybe also use the RCA 3140, two for the price of one I got. And indeed, these guys also, well, sure, you know what? But then some very interesting guys that we didn't even consider putting into a pedal before. These Burr Browns, the 704 and the 227. The 604, I kind of like it. And I'm going to be looking forward to playing with these guys more in my other rigs. I don't use this pedal with my 800 that much anymore. I use this pedal more with my Jubilee now, but you know, it's good for both. So I am interested to hear how these are going to sound with the Jubilee. And this guy, well, I'm going to have to cut it and modify it to fit in here properly. And oh boy, because of how I designed this, I did not give myself a lot of headroom. So that's going to be tricky. Oh boy, I'm going to have to cut the pins down and like just set it up to directly socket like so. Yeah, I got to take like a ½ inch or more off these pins. But I digress. That is a problem, not for video. So, I hope you enjoyed this. There's more coming. This is the biggest single lot of op amps that I ordered. I got about 2 or 3 more lots of op amps coming, but they're only gonna be like 2. So, shorter videos comparing these, but nevertheless, there's more of these coming. And there is also a very much possibility that I might build some other kind of pedal that uses these op amps, and then we'll be able to compare them in there too, to find out what maybe your other favorite pedals sounded like. I don't know yet. I don't know. It's all at the mercy of inspiration. So either way, stay tuned to find out. You know you want to. This was totally not the video I planned on shooting to these today. These came in way earlier than I expected. Oh boy, it's gonna be a long day.